What happens when an arrogant principal forces a black student to perform a violin solo as punishment, not knowing he's the son of a musical prodigy? Buckle up, because this story of triumph over cruelty will leave you speechless. Play, Johnson protested, as Principal Veronica thrust the instrument into his hands. Then I suggest you learn quickly, she sneered, expecting humiliation. But when Johnson's hidden talent emerges, no one, especially not the principal, is prepared for what happens next. A story of cruel intentions transformed into triumph that will leave you breathless. Can one moment of defiance change everything? Dear viewer, if you're watching this story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you're watching right now. Subscribe to Bedtime Tales and press the bell icon now to never miss our daily published stories. Thank you. And let's dive into the full story. The morning assembly at Westrick High School droned on as Principal Veronica. Stevens adjusted her designer glasses and swept her perfectly coiffed blonde hair behind her ear. Her sharp eyes scanned the auditorium, looking for any sign of disorder among the seated students. That's when she spotted him, Johnson Williams, standing at the back of the room, leaning against the wall. Mr. Williams, her voice cut through the assembly like a knife. The entire student body turned to look. Why are you not seated with your classmates? Johnson shifted uncomfortably, his tall frame tensing. Can't sit down right now, Principal Stevens. Principal Veronica's lips curled into a tight smile. Can't or won't. This is exactly the kind of defiance that's becoming all too common. She strode toward him, her heels clicking aggressively on the polished floor. Johnson lowered his voice as she approached. Ma'am, my back is hurting real bad. I don't want to hear excuses, she interrupted, loud enough for the front rows too. Here, when we gather as a school community, we follow the same rules, no exceptions. Johnson's best friend, Aisha, glanced back worriedly from her seat. She knew why he couldn't sit. Everyone in Ms. Reynolds' third period class knew what had happened yesterday. Principal Veronica noticed the violin case propped against the wall next to Johnson. What's this? I wasn't aware you were in the music program. It's Aisha's. I'm just holding it for her until orchestra practice, Johnson explained. A cruel smile spread across Principal Veronica's face. Oh, really? Since you seem to think the rules don't apply to you, perhaps you'd like to showcase your musical talents. We have the spring concert next Friday. She picked up the violin case and thrust it toward him. I'm adding you to the program. Can play a solo. Snickers erupted around the auditorium. Everyone knew Johnson wasn't in any music classes. But I don't play, Johnson started. Then I suggest you learn quickly, Principal Veronica cut him off, her voice dripping with mockery. Or would you prefer detention for the rest of the semester for your continued insubordination? What kind of trap has Johnson been forced into? Johnson reluctantly took the violin case, his face burning with humiliation as whispers and laughter spread throughout the auditorium. Expect nothing less than a full 3-minute performance, Principal Veronica announced loudly. Let this be a lesson to everyone about respect for authority, as she walked away. Satisfied with her public display of power, Johnson stood frozen, clutching the violin case while staring at the floor. What a joke, he heard someone whisper. Joe, can't even read, let alone play music. The assembly ended, and students filed out. Many glancing back at Johnson with either pity or amusement. Aisha rushed to his side. She can't do that to you, Aisha said, her eyes flashing with anger. She just did, Johnson replied, his voice hollow, just like Miss Reynolds did yesterday. Nobody stops them. The pain in his back was nothing compared to the weight of humiliation now pressing down on him. The pain had started in Ms. Reynolds' English class the previous day. Johnson had arrived a minute late. His previous teacher had held the class overtime, and he found his usual seat taken. You'll have to sit in the back, Ms. Reynolds had said without looking up from her desk. The only available chair was broken, with a metal part sticking out from the backrest. Johnson had tried to explain. Ms. Reynolds, this chair is sit-down, Mr. Williams. You've already disrupted my class enough. Johnson had carefully lowered himself, trying to avoid the protruding metal. 20 minutes into the lecture, he had shifted position and winced as the sharp edge dug into his back. "Is there a problem, Mr. Williams?" Ms. Reynolds had demanded. "This chair is broken." "A piece of metal, always an excuse with you," she had cut him off, marching down the aisle. "Stand up." When Johnson stood, Ms. Reynolds had grabbed the back of the chair and shoved it hard against him, forcing him back down. The metal piece had pierced through his shirt, cutting into his lower back. Johnson had cried out in pain, instinctively. Jumping up. "How dare you disrupt my class again?" To the principal's office now. But Principal Veronica had been in a meeting, and Johnson had waited, bleeding slightly, until the final bell. He'd gone straight home afterward, too ashamed to report what happened. His mother had cleaned the wound when he finally told her that evening, Mrs. Williams. Exhausted from her double shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse, had wanted to call the school immediately. "No, Mama, please. It'll just make things worse," Johnson had begged. "This isn't right, Johnson. They can't treat you this way. They already did." Johnson's voice had been quiet, "and they'll find another way to punish me if we complain." His mother had reluctantly agreed to wait, applying antiseptic to the jagged wound. "Your father wouldn't have stood for this," she murmured. Johnson had only vague memories of his father, who had died when he was 7. Kind man with gentle hands and a warm laugh who used to sing him to sleep. That night, unable to lie comfortably on his back, Johnson had found an old photo album. Inside was a picture of his father holding what looked like a violin, though Johnson had never known him to play. He had natural talent, his mother explained when she found Johnson studying the photo. But he never got the chance to develop it. Had to work too many jobs to support his family. Johnson had traced his finger over his father's smiling face. "I didn't know he played music. There's a lot you don't know about your daddy," his mother had said softly. "He would have taught you if he'd had the chance." Now, standing in the school hallway, holding Aisha's violin, Johnson thought about that photograph. About opportunities denied and talents undiscovered. "What are you going to do?" Aisha asked, pulling him back to the present. Johnson's phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "How's your back today? Need me to call the school?" He put the phone away without answering. His mother was already working too hard, worried about too much. He wouldn't add to her burdens. "I don't know." He finally answered Aisha. "I've never even held one of these before today." Aisha squeezed his arm. "I can help you. I've been playing since I was 6. In 10 days? It's impossible," Johnson said, shaking his head. She set me up to fail. That's the whole point. Will Johnson find a way to turn the tables on Principal Veronica? That evening, Johnson sat at the kitchen table, the borrowed violin case unopened before him. His mother moved around the kitchen, preparing dinner, glancing at him with concern. "You haven't told me what happened at school today," she said, setting down a plate of food. Johnson stared at the black case. "Principal Stevens humiliated me in front of the whole school because I couldn't sit down during assembly." The words tumbled out, along with the story of the public challenge. Mrs. Williams listened, her expression darkening. When Johnson finished, she placed her hands firmly on the table and looked him in the eye. "My boy, there are 2 ways to handle. People like Principal Stevens and Ms. Reynolds, you can let them break you. Or you can rise so far above them, they have to crane their necks to see you." She nodded toward the violin case. "Which will it be?" "Oh, Mama, I can't learn to play in 10 days. It's impossible." "Nothing's impossible for a Williams," she countered. Adored grandfather couldn't read until he was 30, but he taught himself. And became a preacher. Your father worked 3 jobs and still found time to teach himself music. But he never got to do anything with it, Johnson argued. That's exactly my point. His mother's voice was quiet but intense. He never got the chance? But you have one right now, even if it came from a place of cruelty. Johnson's phone buzzed. It was Aisha. "Have you opened the case yet? I can come over tonight to get you started." "Aisha offered to teach me," Johnson said. His mother smiled. "That girl's a blessing. Tell her to come over." Aisha sat across from Johnson, demonstrating how to hold the violin. "It's all about posture and position," she explained. "Your back is going to make this harder." Johnson winced as he tried to position the instrument on his shoulder. "This is hopeless." "Not hopeless. Challenging," Aisha corrected. "And you're not doing this alone." She placed his fingers on the strings. "Just feel it for now. Don't worry about playing anything." The weight and shape of the instrument felt strange in Johnson's hands. As he ran his fingers along the smooth wood, something stirred inside him. Curiosity, maybe, or defiance. "Principal Stevens wants you to fail," Aisha said bluntly. "She expects you to either not show up at all, or to get up there and embarrass yourself." "That's exactly what's going to happen," Johnson muttered. "Not if we work at it," Aisha insisted. "You don't have to be perfect, you just have to be good." Enough to shock her. Johnson's mother watched from the doorway. "Your father's first instrument wasn't even a real violin. It was a cigar box with strings he made himself. But he practiced on that thing until his fingers bled." Johnson looked up surprised. "He did?" She nodded. "Music was in his soul. Maybe it's in yours too." Johnson thought about his father's photograph, about Principal Stevens' smug face, about Ms. Reynolds shoving him onto that broken chair. He thought about all the times he'd been underestimated, dismissed, or pushed aside. "They're not expecting anything from me," he said slowly. "So, anything I do will be a surprise." "Exactly." Aisha smiled. "And I've got a plan. We start with something simple but impressive sounding. Even if you can only play one piece, it'll be enough to show them they were wrong about you." Johnson carefully placed the violin under his chin again, ignoring the sharp pain in his back. "Show me again where to put my fingers." As Aisha guided his hands, Johnson made his decision. He would not give Principal Stevens the satisfaction of breaking him. He would not let Ms. Reynolds' cruelty define his capabilities. "I'll need to practice every day," he said. "Before school, lunch breaks, after school." Aisha nodded. "I'll help whenever I can." Mrs. Williams stood watching, pride and worry battling in her eyes. "This isn't just about proving them wrong, Johnson. It's about discovering something in yourself they never bothered to see." Johnson drew the bow across the strings for the first time, producing a harsh, scratching sound that made them all wince. But beneath the awkwardness, there was something, a note, barely formed, but definitely there. Again, Aisha encouraged. This time, lighter with the bow. Johnson tried once more. The sound was marginally better. 10 days, he said, determination, settling into his bones despite the pain in his back. 10 days to learn what takes most people years. His mother squeezed his shoulder gently, careful of his injury. "If anyone can do it, you can." The kitchen filled with screeching sounds as Johnson practiced the basic bow movement again and again. Each attempt was imperfect, but each was also a small act of resistance against assumptions, against cruelty, against the limits others had placed upon him. 10 days to transform humiliation into vindication. 10 days to show Principal Veronica, Stevens, and the entire school exactly who Johnson Williams really was. Subscribe to Bedtime Tales for more stories of resilience and triumph that will inspire you. For the next 3 days, Johnson practiced whenever he could find a moment. Before school, he would wake up at 5 in the morning, careful not to disturb his mother, who had often worked late shifts. With calluses forming on his fingertips, he practiced the basic scales Aisha had taught him. During lunch periods, instead of joining the other students in the cafeteria, Johnson would slip into the empty science lab at the far end of the building. Mr. Patel, a kind-hearted chemistry teacher, had given him permission to use the room. After Johnson explained his situation, "Just don't break any beakers with those high notes," Mr. Patel had joked, but his eyes held understanding. The third afternoon after school, Johnson found his usual practice space. The small courtyard behind the gymnasium, already occupied by the track team. With nowhere else to go, he reluctantly made his way to the music wing, hoping to find an empty practice room. The hallway was quiet, most students having already left for the day. Johnson peered through the small windows of each practice room until he found one that appeared empty. He slipped inside, positioned his violin, and began the simple melody Aisha had taught him. He was so focused on his fingering that he didn't notice the door opening. "What do you think you're doing in here?" Johnson spun around, nearly dropping the violin. Mr. Carter, now the school's music teacher, stood in the doorway with an expression somewhere between surprise and annoyance. "I'm sorry, sir," Johnson said quickly. "I didn't think anyone was around. I needed somewhere to practice." Mr. Carter's eyebrows rose. "Practice? Since when are you in the music program? Johnson hesitated, then decided the truth was his only option. I'm not. Principal Stevens is making me perform at the spring concert. As a punishment, I have a week left to learn. The music teacher's expression shifted from skepticism to curiosity. A punishment? Learning music shouldn't be a punishment. It is when you're expecting me to fail, Johnson said quietly. Mr. Carter was silent for a moment, studying Johnson. Then he surprised him by asking, "What are you trying to play?" "Just this simple piece Aisha Jones showed me." Johnson demonstrated, his fingers still awkward on the strings, the bow movement jerky. The resulting sound was recognizable as music, but only barely. Mr. Carter winced. "Your bow hold is all wrong, and your posture is going to cause you problems." Then he noticed how Johnson was standing, slightly hunched to one side. "Are you injured?" Johnson briefly explained about his back without mentioning Ms. Reynolds. "That makes this even more challenging," Mr. Carter said, "but not impossible." He reached out. "May I?" Johnson handed over the violin, and Mr. Carter quickly tuned it properly. Then played a simple scale that sounded impossibly beautiful compared to Johnson's attempts. "Music takes years to master," Mr. Carter said, handing the violin back. "Oh, but the basics can be learned relatively quickly with the right instruction." He paused, seeming to make a decision. "Show me what you've learned so far." For the next 20 minutes, Mr. Carter watched as Johnson demonstrated his limited skills, occasionally offering corrections to his form and technique. Despite the awkwardness of Johnson's playing, Mr. Carter's expression grew increasingly thoughtful. "You have a good ear," he said finally. "You're picking up the pitch relations intuitively, which is something that can't be taught." "Good?" Johnson asked. "It's essential," Mr. Carter replied. "Technique can be learned, but musical instinct is innate." He checked his watch. "I need to go, but you can keep using this room until 5 p.m. Work on your bow hold like I showed you." As Mr. Carter turned to leave, Johnson called after him. "Do you think it's possible to learn enough in a week to not completely embarrass myself?" Mr. Carter paused at the door. "With that attitude, probably not." Then his expression softened. "But with the right attitude and proper instruction, who knows?" The next afternoon, Johnson was surprised to find Mr. Carter waiting for him in the practice room. "Your bow hold is still wrong," the teacher said by way of greeting, "when your stance is compensating too much for your injury. You'll never produce a clean sound that way." Johnson blinked in surprise. "You're helping me?" "Principal Stevens informed the faculty about your special performance," Mr. Carter said, his tone making clear what he thought of the situation. She seemed quite pleased with herself. Johnson's face burned with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "I don't appreciate music being used as a tool for humiliation," Mr. Carter continued. "It goes against everything I believe as a musician and a teacher." He gestured to the violin. "Show me what you've practiced since yesterday." For the next hour, Mr. Carter worked with Johnson, correcting his technique and teaching him to work around his back pain by adjusting his posture. The music teacher was demanding but patient, pushing Johnson to try again whenever he made a mistake, but never with the cruel edge that Principal Stevens or Ms. Reynolds used. "Before I taught here, I studied with Itzhak Perlman at Juilliard," Mr. Carter revealed as they were wrapping up. "I had opportunities many people dream of." "Why are you teaching at Westridge instead of performing?" Johnson asked. Mr. Carter's expression turned wistful. "Stage fright destroyed my confidence. But teaching, that's where I found my true calling." He adjusted Johnson's elbow position. "Sometimes our paths take unexpected turns." Over the next few days, their afternoon sessions continued. Mr. Carter selected a relatively simple piece that would sound impressive to untrained ears batches. Minuet and Jan broke it down into manageable sections for Johnson to learn. "This piece has recognizable melodies that the audience will connect with," Mr. Carter explained. "Even if your technique isn't perfect, the emotional impact will be there." Johnson absorbed everything like a sponge, practicing until his back spasmed, and Mr. Carter would force him to take breaks. Despite the pain and frustration, something was happening. Notes that once sounded strained began to flow more naturally. His fingers found their positions with increasing confidence. "You have natural talent," Mr. Carter observed on the 5th day of their sessions. With proper training, you could develop into a fine musician. Johnson shook his head. This is just to get through the concert, is it? Mr. Carter challenged. Because I see something more when you play, something you might not recognize yet yourself. Before Johnson could respond, the practice room door swung open. Principal Veronica Stevens stood in the doorway, her expression shifting from surprise to cold. Anger, Mr. Carter. I wasn't aware you were offering private lessons. Just helping a student prepare for his performance, Mr. Carter replied evenly. The one you assigned. Principal Stevens' eyes narrowed. How dedicated of you. I hope you're not giving Mr. Williams false hope about his capabilities. On the contrary, Mr. Carter said, his voice low but firm. I'm simply ensuring he has a fair opportunity to succeed. Principal Stevens' smile didn't reach her eyes. Don't let me interrupt this tutorial. The concert is in 5 days, Mr. Williams. I look forward to your performance. She turned to leave, then added over her shoulder, Oh, and the school board members will be attending. No pressure. After she left, Johnson set down the violin, his hands trembling. She's making sure I fail in front of everyone important. Or, Mr. Carter said quietly, she's ensuring there will be witnesses to something unexpected. He placed a hand on Johnson's shoulder. Don't play for her, Johnson. Play for yourself. Word had spread throughout Westridge High about Johnson's upcoming performance. In the hallways, students whispered as he passed, some offering encouragement, others making jokes at his expense. Ms. Reynolds had taken to calling on him constantly in class, as if hoping to catch him unprepared because of his practice schedule. I hope your musical studies aren't interfering with your academic responsibilities. Mr. Williams, she would say with a thin smile whenever he answered correctly, disappointed at being unable to embarrass him. Johnson kept his head down and focused on the violin. Mr. Carter's guidance, his progress accelerated. The music teacher had been stunned when Johnson played back a complex passage after hearing it just once. That's extraordinary, Mr. Carter had said. Most students need to practice a passage dozens of times before they can replicate it that accurately. I don't read the music well yet, Johnson admitted. But when I hear something, I can kind of feel where the notes should be. Mr. Carter had nodded thoughtfully. You're playing by ear, a valuable skill that many classically trained musicians lack. You're hearing the relationships between notes intuitively. That ability became the foundation of their strategy. Rather than trying to teach Johnson to read music fluently in the limited time available, Mr. Carter focused on developing his ear and muscle memory. He would play sections of the batch piece, and Johnson would repeat them, gradually building up to longer passages. The audience won't know if you're reading music or playing from memory, Mr. Carter explained. They'll only care how it sounds. By the end of the week, Johnson could play the entire first half of the minuet in G with reasonable proficiency. It wasn't perfect. His technique still showed his inexperience, but the musicality was there. Something raw and honest in his interpretation that even Mr. Carter found moving. Something special happening here, the teacher said, after a particularly good practice session. You're connecting with the music on an emotional level that many trained musicians take years to develop. Johnson shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I'm just trying not to embarrass myself. No, Mr. Carter insisted. It's more than that now. You're not just playing notes. You're expressing something. The weekend before the concert, Aisha came over to hear Johnson's progress. Her eyes widened as he played through the piece. Johnson, that's amazing. How did you learn so quickly? Mr. Carter's been helping me, Johnson explained, slightly embarrassed. He says I have a good ear. Good ear. This is incredible, Aisha exclaimed. You've learned in days what took me months when I started. Johnson's mother, who had been listening from the kitchen doorway, wiped away a tear. You sound just like your father, she said softly. That evening, as Johnson carefully stored the violin, he felt something he hadn't expected. Pride. What had begun as a desperate attempt to avoid humiliation had become something meaningful. Him to a part of himself he hadn't known existed. Monday morning, 3 days before the concert, Principal Stevens made an announcement during homeroom. As a reminder, our spring concert will feature a special solo performance by Johnson Williams, she said over the intercom, her voice carrying a hint of mockery. I encourage all faculty and students to attend this unique presentation. During lunch, Johnson was practicing in his usual spot when he became aware of someone watching him. He looked up to find a small group of students from the school orchestra. Standing in the doorway, "Is it true you learned to play in just 2 weeks?" one of them asked. Johnson nodded uncomfortably. "Can we hear something?" another student requested. Hesitantly, Johnson played the opening bars of the batch piece. When he finished, the students exchanged glances. "That's actually really good," said a girl who played cello in the orchestra. "Are you sure you never played before?" Positive, Johnson replied. "Well, you've got serious talent," the cellist said. "We heard Principal Stevens was making you do this as a punishment, but it doesn't sound like punishment when you play." As they left, Johnson sat thinking about her words. The violin, which had felt so foreign in his hands just days ago, now felt like an extension of himself. The music, which had once been just notes to be memorized, now flowed through him, carrying emotions he couldn't express in words. That afternoon, when Johnson arrived for his session with Mr. Carter, he found the music teacher sitting at the piano, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I've been thinking," Mr. Carter said. "The batch piece is coming along well, but I wonder if we should try something different for the concert." "Different?" "But we only have 3 days left," Johnson protested. "I know, but I have a theory." Mr. Carter played a complex melody on the piano, something Johnson had never heard before. "Can you play that back?" Johnson raised the violin to his shoulder and, after a moment's hesitation, replicated the melody with surprising accuracy. Mr. Carter nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "As I suspected, Johnson, I think we've been playing it safe." "Your gift isn't just good pitch memory, it's a deeper musical intuition." He handed Johnson a sheet of music. "This is Massenet's Meditation from Thai. It's usually considered an advanced piece, but I think you can do it justice." "I can barely play the batch piece cleanly," Johnson argued. "The batch piece is technically simpler but requires precision that comes with years of training," Mr. Carter explained. "The Massenet relies more on emotional expression and natural phrasing, qualities you already possess. It will actually highlight your strengths better." Johnson looked at the sheet music dubiously. "I can't learn to read this in 3 days." "Won't need to," Mr. Carter said, turning to the piano. "Listen." As the beautiful, haunting melody filled the room, Johnson closed his eyes. He could feel the music speaking to something deep inside him, something that had been waiting to be awakened. 2 days before the concert, disaster struck. Johnson arrived at school to find a notice posted on the music room door. "All practice rooms reserved for orchestra rehearsal, spring concert preparation." When he knocked on Mr. Carter's office, the music teacher opened the door with a grim expression. "Principal Stevens has scheduled mandatory orchestra rehearsals every afternoon until the concert," Mr. Carter explained. "She claims it's necessary for final preparations. But the orchestra director told me it was a last-minute decision from administration." "She's trying to stop our practice sessions," Johnson realized. Mr. Carter nodded. "It seems our principal is concerned about your progress. What do we do now?" Johnson asked, panic rising in his chest. "I still need to practice." "We adapt," Mr. Carter said firmly. "Meet me in the park across from school at 4:30. We'll continue there." That afternoon in English class, Ms. Reynolds announced a pop quiz on the reading assignment. A lengthy chapter they'd been assigned just the day before. "I hope everyone has completed the reading," she said, her eyes fixed on Johnson. "This will count for 20% of your quarterly grade." Johnson had stayed up until midnight working on the assignment, knowing Ms. Reynolds would be looking for any opportunity to undermine him, completed the quiz with confidence. But as he handed it in, Ms. Reynolds frowned at his paper. "Mr. Williams, I notice you've been very focused on your musical endeavors lately," she said quietly. "I've assigned a special research paper due tomorrow, just for you. 10 pages on symbolism in Hawthorne's works to ensure you're not neglecting your academic responsibilities." Johnson stared at her in disbelief. "But the concert is the day. After tomorrow, I need to practice. Your extracurricular activities are not my concern." Ms. Reynolds cut him off. "Unless you prefer to fail this course." Johnson left the classroom with his teeth clenched in frustration. In the hallway, he ran into Aisha. "Johnson, what's wrong?" she asked, seeing his expression. "Ms. Reynolds just assigned me a 10-page paper. Due tomorrow, and Principal Stevens has blocked all the practice rooms," he explained. "They're making sure I fail." Aisha's eyes flashed with anger. "They already did," Johnson replied, echoing the words he'd said after Ms. Reynolds had injured his back. "Then we'll work together," Aisha declared. "I'll help you with the paper tonight, and you can practice at my house." After school, Johnson met Mr. Carter at the park as planned. His back was throbbing from sitting through classes all day. The stress of Ms. Reynolds' assignment weighed heavily on him. "Your posture is terrible today," Mr. Carter observed as Johnson struggled to position the violin. "Your injury is flaring up, isn't it?" Johnson nodded reluctantly. "It's worse when I'm stressed." Mr. Carter's expression softened. "Johnson, why haven't you reported what Ms. Reynolds did to you?" "That was physical abuse. Who would believe me?" Johnson asked bitterly. "Principal Stevens would just say I was making excuses." "I would believe you," Mr. Carter said quietly. "And there are others who would too." Johnson shook his head. "Doesn't matter now. I just need to get through this concert." They practiced for an hour, but Johnson's playing was affected by his pain and distraction. The beautiful phrases of the Massenet piece kept breaking down into disjointed notes as his concentration lapsed. "This isn't working," Johnson finally said in frustration, lowering the violin. Maybe I should just play the batch piece after all. At least I know it better." "The problem isn't the music," Mr. Carter said. "It's that you're playing from a place of fear and anger. Those emotions have their place in music, but not when they're directed at yourself." He sat down on a park bench and gestured for Johnson to join him. "Why are you doing this, Johnson?" "'Cause Principal Stevens is forcing." "Me too," Johnson answered automatically. No, Mr. Carter shook his head. "Why are you working so hard? You could have simply refused, taken the detention, or deliberately played poorly." Johnson was silent for a long moment. Because I want to show them they're wrong about me," he finally admitted. "All of them, Principal Stevens, Ms. Reynolds, everyone who thinks I'm nothing. And is that all?" Mr. Carter pressed gently. Johnson stared at the violin in his hands. "No," he said softly. "I want to play well because when I play, I feel connected to something larger than myself, to something beautiful." Mr. Carter nodded. "That's the truth I've been waiting to hear. It's what needs to come through in your music." He stood up. "I'll play from that place, not from your anger or fear, but from that connection." Johnson raised the violin again, closed his eyes, and began to play. This time, the music flowed differently, imperfect still, but alive with emotion and genuine feeling. When he finished, he opened his eyes to find Mr. Carter watching him with a mixture of pride and something like wonder. "That," the teacher said, "quietly, is why they're afraid of you, Johnson. Not because you might embarrass yourself, but because you might reveal your true potential." That night, with Aisha's help, Johnson completed the research paper while taking breaks to practice. His mother applied a heating pad to his back and prepared his favorite meal. "You've got this, baby," she encouraged him. "No matter what happens at that concert, I'm already so proud of you." As Johnson finally fell into bed, exhausted but determined, he thought about what Mr. Carter had said. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider that maybe, just maybe, this forced performance wasn't the end of something, but the beginning. Wednesday evening, as Johnson was preparing for his final practice session with Mr. Carter before the concert, his phone rang. It was the music teacher calling from a number Johnson didn't recognize. "Johnson, I've had to leave school early today," Mr. Carter explained, his voice tinged with excitement. "Hey, can you meet me at Riverside Music Shop instead of the park? There's something I need to show you." 45 minutes later, Johnson pushed open the door of the small music store across town. The shop was crammed with instruments of all kinds, sheet music lining the walls, and the smell of wood polish and rosin hung in the air. Mr. Carter was waiting near the back, talking with an elderly man who owned the store. "Johnson, this is Mr. Rossetti," Mr. Carter introduced them. "Wow, he's been in the music business for over 50 years. Mr. Rossetti studied Johnson with keen eyes. So, this is the young man you told me about, Carter, the natural talent. Johnson shifted uncomfortably. I'm still learning, sir. We're all still learning, son, Mr. Rossetti replied with a smile. Even after 50 years, Mr. Carter led Johnson to a small office at the back of the shop. I've been doing some research, he explained, turning on a computer monitor. Something about your natural musicality reminded me of another student I once knew, someone with similar intuitive abilities. On the screen was a video from what appeared to be a university recital. The date stamp showed it was from nearly 20 years ago. I called some colleagues at my old school, Mr. Carter continued. They helped me dig this up from the archives. He pressed play, and a young black man walked onto the stage, violin in hand. Even before he started playing, Johnson felt a jolt of recognition. That's my father, he whispered. Mr. Carter nodded. Michael Williams. He was a music student at Eastman for one semester before he had to drop out for financial reasons. He watched Johnson's stunned expression. You didn't know? Johnson shook his head, unable to take his eyes off the screen. I knew he played a little, but not like this. On the video, his father began to play. Complex classical piece performed with technical skill and deep emotional expression. The young man on screen closed his eyes as he played, swaying slightly with the music, his face showing the same connection to the music that Mr. Carter had noticed in Johnson. Your father was extraordinarily talented, Mr. Carter explained. Was offered a scholarship after this performance, but he had already decided to leave school. Your mother was pregnant with you, and he felt his responsibility was to provide a stable income. Tears welled in Johnson's eyes as he watched his father play with skill and passion he'd never known about. The resemblance between their playing styles was unmistakable. The same intuitive phrasing, the same emotional connection to the music. I had no idea, Johnson whispered. Mom never told me he was this good. Maybe it was too painful, Mr. Carter suggested gently. Dreams deferred often are. When the video ended, Johnson sat in silence, processing this new connection to his father. Why did you look for this? He finally asked. Because your musicality is too natural to be coincidental, Mr. Carter replied. When I saw how quickly you learned, how intuitively you understood phrasing and tone, I suspected there might be a musical heritage we could draw upon. Mr. Rossetti, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. Carter tells me you're playing Massenet's Meditation from Thai tomorrow. Your father played that piece beautifully. He did? Johnson asked. Indeed, and now I understand why Carter brought you here. The elderly man disappeared into a back room and returned carrying a violin case, worn with age but clearly well-maintained. This belonged to your father. He sold it to me when times got hard, but made me promise never to sell it to anyone else. He said he'd buy it back someday when things turned around. Lee placed the case on the table and opened it. Inside lay a violin, with a rich amber finish, obviously old, but lovingly cared for. I couldn't afford, Johnson stammered. It's already yours, Mr. Rossetti, said simply. Your father paid for it in full, just in installments I never cashed. Last payment came a week before he passed. I've been waiting for the right time to return it to your family. Johnson carefully lifted the instrument from its case. It felt different from Aisha's violin, heavier, somehow more substantial. May I? He asked. Mr. Rossetti's nod. Johnson tucked the violin under his chin and drew the bow across the strings. The sound that emerged was rich and resonant, carrying a depth that Aisha's student violin couldn't match. That's a German instrument from the late 1800s, Mr. Rossetti explained. Nothing fancy by professional standards. Solid craftsmanship with excellent tone. Your father could make it sing like few others I've heard. Johnson played a few measures of the Massenet piece, and both men watched in silence. Mr. Carter with satisfaction, Mr. Rossetti with growing amazement. It's uncanny, the store owner said when Johnson finished. The resemblance in your playing. It's as if your father's musical spirit lives in you. That night, Johnson took his father's violin home, explaining to his mother what he had discovered. She sat on the couch, clutching a tissue, as Johnson showed her the video Mr. Carter had found. I didn't tell you everything about your father's music, she admitted. It hurt too much. He gave it all up for us, and I always felt guilty that he never got to pursue his dream. Why did he never play at home? Johnson asked. His mother wiped her eyes. He did when you were very small. But after a while, I think it became too painful. For him, a reminder of what might have been. She touched the violin reverently. I had no idea Otto still had this. Mr. Rossetti said Dad was still making payments on it, Johnson said. She nodded. That sounds like your father. He never gave up on anything he truly cared about. She squeezed Johnson's hand. Just like his son. Johnson practiced late into the night. His back pain temporarily forgotten as he connected with his father's instrument and legacy. Something had changed. What had begun as a response to humiliation had become a bridge to his past, and possibly his future. As he finally set the violin aside to sleep, Johnson felt a certainty he hadn't experienced before. Tomorrow's performance was no longer about Principal Stevens or proving anyone wrong. It was about honoring his father and embracing a gift he hadn't known was his birthright. The morning of the concert, Johnson arrived at school early to find Mr. Carter waiting outside the music room. I have news, the teacher said, his expression serious but excited. An old colleague of mine is coming to the concert tonight. Okay, Johnson replied, not understanding the significance. Dr. Marcus Williams, Mr. Carter clarified. He's the music director at Eastman School of Music and one of the most respected violinists in the country. He's also on the state education board. Johnson's eyes widened. Why would he come to a high school concert? 'Cause I called him, Mr. Carter said simply. Sent him the practice video we recorded yesterday. He was impressed, to say the least, especially when I told him how long you've been playing. Recorded me yesterday? Johnson asked, surprised. With your mother's permission, hope you don't mind, Mr. Carter added. Dr. Williams and I studied together years ago. He's always on the lookout for exceptional talent, particularly from underrepresented backgrounds. Johnson felt a mixture of excitement and terror. So instead of just embarrassing myself in front of the school and Principal Stevens, I get to do it in front of a famous musician too? Mr. Carter laughed. That's not why I invited him, Dr. Williams. It's connections and influence that could open doors for you if you're interested in pursuing music further. The idea was so unexpected that Johnson didn't know how to respond. Until 2 weeks ago. Music had never been part of his plans or dreams. Throughout the day, Johnson's nerves increased. The concert was scheduled for 7 p.m., and word had spread that something unusual was expected from his performance. Some students offered encouragement, while others made it clear they were only coming to witness his humiliation. Principal Stevens made an announcement over the intercom, a reminder that tonight's spring concert will feature performances from our band and orchestra, as well as a special solo by Johnson Williams. The school board will be in attendance, so let's all show our best behavior. Her tone carried a hint of warning that wasn't lost on Johnson. After school, Johnson went to the auditorium for a final practice on stage. To his surprise, a tall, distinguished-looking black man was standing with Mr. Carter near the piano. Johnson, this is Dr. Marcus Williams. Mr. Carter introduced them. Dr. Williams extended his hand with a warm smile. It's a pleasure to meet you, young man. David has told me quite a bit about your remarkable progress. Thank you, sir, Johnson replied nervously. But I've only been playing for 2 weeks. Not really 2 weeks? Dr. Williams interrupted, looking at Mr. Carter in disbelief. I thought you were exaggerating. Not at all, Mr. Carter confirmed. Johnson has an extraordinary natural facility for music, and as it turns out, it runs in the family. Briefly, they explained about Johnson's father and the violin that had been returned to him. Dr. Williams nodded thoughtfully. Music has a way of finding its rightful heirs. Sometimes it skips a generation, sometimes it lies dormant, but true talent always emerges eventually. He gestured to the stage. Would you mind playing a bit for me before the audience arrives? Johnson took a deep breath, positioned his father's violin, and began to play the Masane piece. Despite his nervousness, the music flowed more naturally than ever before. The rich tone of the old violin filling the auditorium with haunting beauty. When he finished, Dr. Williams was silent for a moment. That was remarkable, he finally said. There are technical issues, of course, That's to be expected with so little training, but the musicality, the emotional connection? He turned to Mr. Carter. You were right to call me. They were interrupted by the sound of the auditorium doors opening. Principal Veronica Stevens walked in, followed by Ms. Reynolds. Both women stopped short when they saw the three of them on stage. Mr. Carter. The auditorium is supposed to be closed until 6 p.m. for setup, Principal Stevens said sharply. Then she noticed Dr. Williams. I'm sorry. Don't believe we've been introduced. Dr. Marcus Williams, he replied, stepping forward to shake her hand. Eastman School of Music. I'm an old friend of David's, and he invited me to attend tonight's concert. Principal Stevens' expression shifted instantly to one of practiced charm. Dr. Williams. What an honor to have you at Westridge. I wasn't aware you were coming. She shot Mr. Carter a look that promised future consequences. It was a last-minute decision, Dr. Williams explained smoothly. David told me about a promising young violinist in your student body, and I wanted to hear for myself. Principal Stevens' smile faltered slightly. I see. I'm afraid Mr. Williams has only just begun his musical studies. I wouldn't want you to form any premature judgments based on what is essentially a disciplinary exercise. Disciplinary. Dr. Williams raised an eyebrow. A misunderstanding, Mr. Carter interjected quickly. Johnson needed an opportunity to showcase his talents. Principal Stevens graciously provided one. Ms. Reynolds gave a small, derisive snort that didn't go unnoticed by Dr. Williams. Well, I look forward to the performance, Dr. Williams said, his tone pleasant, but his eyes shrewd as they moved between Principal Stevens and Johnson. In my experience, true talent often emerges from unexpected places. Indeed, Principal Stevens replied tightly. Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to prepare the auditorium. Johnson, perhaps you should rest before your performance. We wouldn't want you to strain yourself. The dismissal in her tone was clear. As Johnson packed up his violin, he overheard Principal Stevens speaking urgently to Ms. Reynolds. Find out who this Dr. Williams is and what his connection to the State Education Board might be, she whispered, and make sure all the documentation for Johnson's disciplinary issues is in order, just in case. Johnson left the auditorium with a mixture of nervousness and a new, unexpected feeling. For the first time, he sensed that the evening might not end in the humiliation Principal Stevens had planned. By 6:30 p.m., the Westridge High School auditorium was filling up. Johnson peeked through the curtains from backstage and saw more people than had ever attended a school concert before. Word had spread about his punishment performance, and it seemed everyone wanted to witness either a disaster or a miracle. He spotted his mother in the third row, dressed in her best outfit despite coming straight from her hospital shift. Beside her sat Aisha, who gave a thumbs up when she caught his eye. In the front row, the school board members chatted with Principal Stevens, who was pointing out various features of the recently renovated auditorium. Dr. Williams had taken a seat near the back, observing everything with quiet interest. Johnson noticed Principal Stevens glancing nervously in his direction several times. How are you feeling? Mr. Carter asked, joining Johnson backstage. Terrified, Johnson admitted. There are so many people. Focus on the music, not the audience. Mr. Carter advised. Remember what we discussed. Play from your heart, not your fear. The orchestra portion of the concert went smoothly. Johnson watched from backstage as his schoolmates performed pieces they'd practiced for months. Finally, Principal Stevens approached the microphone for the introduction Johnson had been dreading. For our final performance tonight, we have a special solo, she announced, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. As some of you know, Johnson Williams will be playing the violin for us. This performance comes as part of our school's alternative disciplinary approach, encouraging students to develop new skills rather than serving traditional detention. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Johnson saw his mother's expression harden. While I don't expect the polish of our regular music students, Principal Stevens continued, I hope you'll all be supportive of this educational experiment. As she stepped away from the microphone, Dr. Williams rose from his seat. If I might add something, he called out, his deep voice carrying authority that made Principal Stevens freeze mid-step. Of course, Dr. Williams, she replied, unable to refuse such a distinguished guest. Dr. Williams approached the stage. For those who don't know me, I'm Dr. Marcus Williams from Eastman School of Music. I came tonight specifically to hear Johnson Williams perform. While Principal Stevens is correct that Johnson has only recently begun formal musical training, I think it's important to note that musical talent often exists independent of formal education. Sometimes the greatest gift an educator can offer is simply recognizing the potential that already exists within a student. The pointed comment wasn't lost on anyone. Principal Stevens' smile became brittle as she returned to her seat. Johnson Williams, Dr. Williams announced. Playing Massenet's Meditation from Thai, heart-pounding, Johnson walked onto the stage, carrying his father's violin. The auditorium fell silent as he positioned himself under the spotlight. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm him. His back throbbed, his hands trembled, and the sea of faces before him blurred.
Ow.
Then he caught sight of his mother, whose eyes shone with tears and pride. Next to her, Aisha nodded encouragingly. Behind them, he noticed several students from Ms. Reynolds' class, the ones who had witnessed his humiliation, watching with expectant faces. Johnson closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and raised the violin to his chin. He thought of his father, of the legacy he'd never known he carried, of the music that somehow lived in his blood despite years of silence. The first notes filled. The auditorium, tentative at first, then gaining confidence as Johnson lost himself in the music. The technical imperfections that Mr. Carter had warned about were there, but they were overshadowed by something more powerful, the raw emotion and natural musicality that couldn't be taught. As Johnson played, the audience sat transfixed. Even Principal Stevens' practiced composure slipped, her expression shifting from smug expectation of failure to disbelief and then something approaching alarm. In the middle of the piece, the auditorium doors opened, and a uniformed police officer entered, accompanied by a woman in a business suit who scanned the room before spotting Principal Stevens. They made their way down the aisle and stopped. To whisper something to Dr. Williams, who nodded grimly. Johnson, lost in the music, noticed none of this. He played the final notes of the piece with his eyes still closed. The violin singing with a voice that seemed to come from somewhere beyond him, perhaps from his father, perhaps from some deeper well of inherited memory. When he lowered the bow, the silence lasted only a heartbeat before the auditorium erupted. In applause, Johnson opened his eyes to see the entire audience on their feet, students, parents, teachers, even the school board members. Dr. Williams was the first to reach him as he left the stage, clasping his hand warmly. "Extraordinary," he said. With proper training, he was interrupted by Principal Stevens, who pushed her way through the crowd gathering around Johnson. "A surprising performance," she said tightly, though of course with more discipline and proper instruction. "Principal Stevens," the woman in the business suit cut in, stepping forward with the police officer beside her. "I'm Detective Sarah Chin from the County Special Victims Unit, and this is Officer Taylor from the School Resource Division. We need to speak with you immediately regarding allegations of physical abuse against a student." The color drained from Principal Stevens' face. "I don't know what you're talking about. This is hardly the time or place." "We have video evidence," Detective Chin stated flatly, "from the security camera in Ms. Reynolds' classroom, showing her assault on Johnson Williams last week." Collective gasp went through the crowd. Johnson stood frozen, his violin still in his hand. "That's impossible," Principal Stevens sputtered. "Those cameras aren't timing. No. The cameras were installed last month as part of the security upgrade," one of the school board members interjected. "The footage is automatically archived for 30 days. Ms. Reynolds pushed through. The crowd, her face contorted with anger. "This is ridiculous." "The boy was being disruptive, and I simply shoved him onto a broken chair with enough force to cause a puncture wound to his back," Detective Chin finished for her. "We have the medical report from the hospital as well." Johnson looked at his mother in confusion. She hadn't taken him to any hospital. "I reported it," Mr. Carter said quietly to Johnson. "After you showed me your injury yesterday, I couldn't stand by and let it continue." Dr. Williams stepped forward. As a member of the State Education Board, I requested an immediate investigation when David contacted me with his concerns. The safety of students is our highest priority. Principal Stevens' face hardened as she realized the trap she had walked into. Johnson Williams has been a disciplinary problem since he arrived at this school. Ms. Reynolds was simply maintaining classroom order. And this concert was an attempt to provide constructive correction rather than punitive measures. By publicly humiliating him? Dr. Williams asked. By setting him up to fail? That's not education, Miss Stevens. That's abuse of power. The school board president approached, her expression grave. Principal Stevens, Ms. Reynolds, I think it would be best if you both came with us to discuss this matter privately. In light of these allegations, you are both suspended pending a full investigation. As Principal Stevens and Ms. Reynolds were escorted from the auditorium, Johnson found himself surrounded by classmates offering congratulations on his performance. His mother enveloped him in a tight hug, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "Your father would be too." Dr. Williams waited patiently until the immediate commotion had subsided before approaching Johnson again. "That violin belonged to your father?" he asked. Johnson nodded. "Yes, sir. I just got it back yesterday." Dr. Williams smiled. "I thought I recognized it. Michael Williams was in my first-year seminar at Eastman before he had to leave. Always wondered. What happened to him?" He placed a hand on Johnson's shoulder. "His talent lives on in you, perhaps even stronger. If you're interested, I'd like to discuss scholarship opportunities for our summer program." As the reality of what had just happened began to sink in, Johnson looked around at the transformed auditorium. What had been intended as his public humiliation had become something entirely different. The vindication, celebration, and possibly the beginning of a new path he had never imagined for himself. News of what had happened at the spring concert spread through Westridge High School like wildfire. By Monday morning, everyone knew about Principal Stevens and Ms. Reynolds' suspensions, the police investigation, and Johnson's unexpected musical talent. The school board appointed an interim principal, Dr. Eleanor Gaines, a retired educator known for her progressive leadership style. Her first official act was to call an assembly to address the situation directly. What happened? Johnson Williams represents a failure of our educational system, she told the silent auditorium. When those entrusted with nurturing young minds instead abuse their authority, we all suffer. This incident has revealed serious issues within our school culture that must be addressed. Johnson sat in the back of the assembly, still uncomfortable. With the attention, students he'd never spoken to before now smiled and waved at him. Teachers who had previously ignored him suddenly found time to ask about his interests and aspirations. It's weird. He confided to Aisha at lunch. Last week, I was invisible. Now everyone wants to be my friend. People like being associated with success, Aisha replied pragmatically. But true friends are there before the spotlight finds you. She nudged his shoulder gently. Speaking of which, are you really going to that summer program at Eastman? Johnson nodded. Dr. Williams called Mom yesterday. They're offering a full scholarship, including room and board. He says with intensive training, I could be ready to audition for the school's preparatory division in the fall. That's amazing, Aisha said, her voice tinged with both happiness and sadness. I'm going to miss you this summer, though. Nice. Just for 6 weeks, Johnson assured her. Dr. Williams says you should apply too. Your technique is actually much better than mine. The conversation was interrupted by Mr. Carter, who approached their table with a smile. Johnson, do you have a minute? There's someone I'd like you to meet. In the music room, a young woman with a camera was waiting. This is Lena Parker from the Tribune, Mr. Carter introduced her. She's doing a story on arts education in underserved schools, and she'd like to interview you about your experience. Me? Johnson asked, surprised. But I've barely started playing. That's exactly why your story is so compelling, Lena explained. It highlights how many talented students might never discover their gifts without proper access and encouragement. The interview lasted nearly an hour, with Johnson awkwardly trying to explain his sudden immersion in music and his unexpected connection to his father's legacy. Would you be willing to play something for us? Lena asked when they had finished. Talking, It would really enhance the article to have a video component online. Reluctantly, Johnson agreed. As he played a portion of the Massenet piece, now more polished after another week of practice, Lena recorded it on her phone. Mr. Carter watched with quiet pride. "That was beautiful," Lena said when he finished. "One last question. What would you say to other students who might have undiscovered talents?" Johnson thought for a moment. "I'd say sometimes the thing that's meant for you finds you, even when others try to use it against you. And it's never too late to discover something new about yourself." 3 days later, the Tribune published the article, "Hidden Talent: How a Disciplinary Action Revealed a Musical Prodigy." The accompanying video quickly went viral, spreading far beyond the local community. By the end of the week, Johnson had received messages from music educators across the country offering encouragement and support. Dr. Williams called again. This time, with even more exciting news. Johnson, the Eastman Preparatory Division, would like you to perform at their spring showcase. It's unusual for a pre-admission student, but your story has captured a lot of attention. It would be an opportunity to perform on a professional stage with proper acoustics. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," Johnson said honestly. "You are?" Dr. Williams assured him. "And this time, you'll be playing for people who want to celebrate your talent, not exploit it." The day of the showcase, Johnson stood backstage at Eastman's Kilburn Hall, listening to polished performances from students who had been playing for years. His mother and Mr. Carter sat in the audience, having driven 3 hours to be there. Even Aisha had come, missing a day of school. With her parents' blessing, when the announcer called his name, Johnson walked onto the stage with his father's violin. The hall was larger and more elegant than his school auditorium, with perfect acoustics that would amplify every note and every mistake. He positioned himself under the spotlight, feeling the weight of expectation. But unlike at the school concert, there was no fear now, no humiliation lurking. Instead, as Johnson closed his eyes and began to play, there was only the music, the connection to his father, to a heritage he was just beginning to explore, and to a future suddenly rich with possibility. The piece he played was still meditation, but it had evolved in the weeks since the school concert. Under Dr. Williams' guidance, Johnson had refined his technique while preserving the natural expressiveness that had made his playing special from the beginning. When the final note faded into silence, the applause was immediate and thunderous. Johnson opened his eyes to see the audience on their feet, not from shock or surprise this time, but from genuine appreciation of his talent, as he took his bow. Johnson caught sight of his mother wiping away tears, Mr. Carter applauding proudly, and Aisha jumping up and down with excitement. But most striking was the realization that his own eyes were wet not from pain or humiliation, but from the pure joy of finding his voice through music. 3 months after the spring concert that changed everything, Johnson sat in the back of the county courthouse, watching as Principal Veronica Stevens and Ms. Reynolds faced the consequences of their actions. The school board's investigation had uncovered not just the incident with Johnson, but a pattern of discriminatory behavior targeting minority students. "This case represents a fundamental breach of the trust placed in educators," the prosecutor stated. "These students came to school expecting guidance and support. Instead, they received humiliation and physical abuse." Principal Stevens sat stone-faced at the defendant's table, while Ms. Reynolds appeared to be fighting back tears. Neither would look in Johnson's direction. After the hearing, which resulted in probation and permanent revocation of their teaching licenses, Johnson stepped outside to find reporters waiting. He declined to comment, still uncomfortable with his newfound visibility. "You don't owe them anything," his mother said as they walked to the car. "Your story is yours to tell or keep private as you choose." Johnson nodded, grateful for her protection. "I don't want to be known just as the kid who was abused or even as the kid who learned violin in 2 weeks. There's more to me than that." "There always was," she replied softly. "Just took the right circumstances for others to see it." The changes at Westridge High School had been swift and significant. Dr. Gaines, initially appointed as interim principal, had accepted the position permanently. Under her leadership, the school had implemented comprehensive anti-discrimination policies, and expanded its arts programs with new community partnerships. Mr. Carter had been named head of the music department with increased funding for instruments and scholarships. One of his first actions was to establish a mentorship program pairing experienced music students with beginners from underrepresented backgrounds. Johnson's summer at Eastman had transformed his playing. 6 weeks of intensive training had built upon his natural talent, giving him technical skills to match his intuitive musicality. Dr. Williams had taken a personal interest in his development, often staying after hours to work with him on particularly challenging passages. "Your father had the same determination," Dr. Williams had told him one evening. He would practice until his fingers bled, then wrap them in tape and keep going. "Why did he give it up?" Johnson had asked. Dr. Williams had considered the question. Carefully, some would say. Circumstances forced him to choose between his dream and his responsibilities. "But knowing Michael, I think he found a different dream, you and your mother." He redirected his passion, not abandoned it. Now, as Johnson prepared to begin his formal studies in the Eastman Preparatory Division, while continuing his regular high school education, he understood what Dr. Williams meant. The violin had become more than just an instrument to him. It was a connection to his father, a voice for emotions he had previously kept hidden, and a path to a future he was only beginning to imagine. The final Tribune article about the case ran with the headline, "Justice Served. Educators Held Accountable as Student Musician Flourishes." It included a photo of Johnson performing at the Eastman Showcase, completely absorbed in the music. His face showing the same expression his father's had in that old university recital video. Sometimes, Johnson told the reporter in his only comment, what begins as someone trying to hurt you becomes the very thing that sets you free. As he practiced late into the evening, preparing for his first formal recital as an Eastman student, Johnson often thought about how differently things might have turned out. If Principal Stevens hadn't tried to humiliate him with the violin, if Mr. Carter hadn't recognized his potential, as if his father hadn't left behind a legacy of music that somehow found its way into Johnson's hands exactly when he needed. At most, the path that had begun with pain and humiliation had led to healing and discovery. The instrument that had been thrust upon him as a joke had become his voice, and the people who had tried to break his spirit had instead revealed his strength. Johnson Williams placed his father's violin under his chin, closed his eyes, and began to play. Not for Principal Stevens or the audience at Eastman, or even for his teachers. He played for himself and for his father, and for all the music that had been waiting inside him, ready to emerge when the moment was right. Dear friend, this story reminds us that talent exists everywhere, waiting to be discovered and nurtured. Too often, students of color face barriers created by those meant to support them. By recognizing and challenging these injustices, we create space for extraordinary potential to flourish. Did this story move you? Like this video to help it reach others who need to hear this message of resilience and hidden potential? Subscribe to Bedtime Tales for more powerful stories that celebrate triumph over adversity and remind us that sometimes our greatest strengths emerge from our most challenging moments.